I wanted to cover the provisional mortality statistics. So this is the Australian Bureau of Statistics. They print all sorts of stats, and anybody can go and access this. It's on their website, so it's abs.gov.au, and you can search for whatever stats. So they do like uh, death rates, and they go into specifics. You can even download the data if you really want to crunch the numbers yourself. And they usually give like a summary at the top here, and they tell you like, is this the latest release? They tell you what time period this data is from. So this is January to May of 2023. And this was released, not that long ago. Okay, so here it says there's 16.3k deaths. Ooh, maybe I'll zoom in. It's a little bit small. Okay. Here it says there's 16.3k deaths, which occurred in May 2023. It's 0.7% less than in May 2022. And on surface level, that seems good, right? Because you have a lower death rate, apparently. But we'll go into details about why that might be a little bit misleading to start off with. Okay, so they said the death rate for May was 45.2 per 100k people, compared to 47.2 in 2022. Then they talk about COVID deaths, apparently 552 deaths in June, down from 602 in May. Okay, so this is just an update about their releases and reportings of the stats. Okay, so the reason why this is a provisional mortality statistics report is because ABS says on their own websites and previous, information, there's about a 2-year delay between the cause of death report that comes out every year and the time period they're referencing. So for example, 2020, the cause of death stats don't get published until 2022 because they've got to collect all the data. The coroner has to certify certain deaths, investigations need to be completed, etc. You get the drift. So it takes some time to weed through everything and collate all the data. And then not only that, but sometimes there are revisions, especially if there's still open inquests into certain deaths. So you might even have to wait longer than 2 years to get, all the data because it does get revised. Okay. Here's a very interesting paragraph that I thought was a bit suspicious. So it talks about the baseline comparisons. So let's say the average death rate of any normal year, right? So it's to provide a typical year to compare the current year to. So deaths for 2023 have 2 comparison points. They're compared to deaths in 2022 and in a baseline period with average number of deaths occurring in 2017 to 2019 and 2021. You see there's a missing year here of 2022, right? I'm sorry, of 2020. Weird. They explain it later. So here they say there's 775 deaths which occurred in 2022. This is significantly higher than usual and is not considered to be a typical year for mortality in Australia. Therefore, 2020 has not been included in the baseline average and is instead presented separately in graphs and table. Yeah, so you can see there was also 2022 missing here and 2020. So therefore, they've only used 2017 to 2019 and 2021 data for that baseline average. Then they say 2022 is not included in the baseline. Sorry, 2020 is not included in the baseline for 2022 data because it includes periods where numbers of deaths were significantly lower than expected. and similarly not considered to be a typical year for mortality in Australia. So 2020, the year of the pandemic where everybody was freaking out about how many people are going to die, and there's so many people dying from COVID, and we just locked everybody in their homes for the fear of death, right? Yeah, there was such a significant decrease in death, and it wasn't just from the lockdowns as people want to blame it. There was such a significant reduction in deaths. I don't think you can really call that a pandemic if you're an honest scientist. They don't even use the data from 2022 because it was so low in deaths. You can't call that pandemic. If it was a real pandemic, you'd be having excess deaths. For example, later on they talk about, I think 2017 or 2019, they had a higher death rate due to a bad influenza year. That is more of a pandemic than 2020. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to hold the rage in. I I like reading these reports, by the way, because I had studied bioscience, so I did a bit of stats. Not the best at it, but like I can read articles and understand, what they're trying to do. And you can kind of, when you learn the basics of stats, you can kind of tell when someone's fudging numbers or like interpreting things and trying to present things in a certain way that's not really true to the data. So I highly recommend it if you want to, practice critical thinking, to learn how to analyze stats and how stats can be manipulated to tell a certain story. So of course, all this stuff here, it's public information. It doesn't get taught or talked about anywhere. I don't see any news reporters talking about this, or going through the data, actually doing their jobs and researching. Okay, so here they talk about COVID mortality, blah, blah, blah. And then here it talks about all-cause deaths. So in 2023, there were 8,564 deaths more than the baseline average, which is a 13.2% increase. In statistics, that is a humongous increase, okay? You'd have to investigate it. It's crazy. And then they say, but 2,900 something deaths less than 2022. So compared to 2022. So in 2023, May 2023, 16K deaths, 15% more than the baseline average, but a little bit less than 2022. Okay, so you go look at this data. I'll zoom out a little bit. So this graph talks about all deaths in Australia. And you've got 2023, 2022, and then the baseline average. Remember, the baseline average doesn't include 2020. So here, this orange line is 2022. We lost a lot of people in 2022. Like, what the frick is this? I'm sorry. I can't. There are no words to no nice, polite words to adequately describe this humongous increase. This maroon line here with the blue shaded bit, that's the baseline average. So the variations is the blue line. It's within range if it's a normal variation in the range. This is a huge difference. Okay, if you're studying anything and there's such a big jump, there's a serious problem. There's like either a famine or a plague or something causing such a high increase in death. So, and this blue line is the 2023 data, right? So you can see in the first few weeks, it's not as high as 2022, but you're still kind of following this curve here with 2022 in the later weeks. and it's still much higher than the baseline average. This is not normal, okay? I myself have heard of more deaths recently, in the last year at least, than ever. Like, and I know this is anecdotal, okay? Still don't know anybody who actually died from COVID, like where that was their primary cause of death. I know people whom I suspect something happened to them after the experimental drug, because it's included, those diseases that they got diagnosed with, they're included in the Pfizer documents, in their adverse events of special interest reports. You can find it and read it for yourself. I can't prove it because I don't have the tools to be able to do that. But I have my suspicions. And this graph, yeah, very, very, very suspicious. Australia needs an inquiry into this, but they're never going to do it because the government, mandated people and forced people to get it. So it's going to be very difficult for them to take responsibility for this or even want to talk about this big elephant in the room. It really pisses me off if you can't tell. Okay, so here they talk about like the male and female death rate, blah blah blah. And then the age specific death rate as well. I think I'm trying to look for a percentage difference instead of just pure numbers. Okay, so you can see here age specific death rates. This is not in a percentage, so it's harder to compare sometimes raw numbers, but you can see a significant difference. So they break it down into the different age brackets. This is the baseline average for January to May. So for 2022, it was 294.9. For your baseline average, it was only 256. We're in 2023 and it's 277. So 2022, very, very, very high, much higher than baseline average. 2023, very high as well, not as high as last year, but still higher than the baseline average. Okay, so we look at the specific causes of death, and they claim, we have, 500 something deaths due to COVID. It's lower than last year, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, they just state the obvious: number of people dying with COVID has increased. Dying with COVID is different to dying from COVID, yeah? You could happen to test positive with COVID when you die from like a heart attack or pneumonia. And that would, be considered dying with COVID, but COVID didn't cause your death. It was just another factor. There were more like major contributing factors to your death, right? Okay, so let's look at the other causes of death. Dementia, which includes Alzheimer's, were 17.8 above the baseline average in May 2023 and 2.1% above May 2022. So, you know how we locked down everybody and took this experimental drug to save grandma? Yeah, grandma's dying from dementia at a much higher rate than the baseline average. This is not normal, okay? So frustrating. In January to May for 2023, it was 16.1% higher than the baseline average and 3% lower than the same period in 2022. They age standardized it, which means they accounted for age and adjusted the number. Cardiac conditions, other cardiac conditions, 15.2% above the age baseline average in May 2023. For January to May in 2023, 15.5% higher than the baseline average. Diabetes deaths were 22% above the baseline average in May. For January to May 2023, they were 18.7% higher than baseline average. And cancer for May, 8.1% above baseline average. For January to May 2023, 7.4% above baseline average. Respiratory diseases, 1.1% above baseline average. For January to May, we're 4.5% above average. And then you've got ischemic heart disease, which was about, I think, a little bit lower, 5.4% below baseline average, and 9.5% lower than last year, same period. Cerebrovascular disease was 2% higher than baseline average. And for January to May, it was 3.3% below baseline average and below the same period in 2022. Okay, so you can see all these numbers here. And if you're interested, you can always go crunch these numbers. I'll edit the description of the video to add it. I forgot to do this earlier. I normally put the sources and the stories in the description. So after I upload the replay of this, I'll add that in. Okay, so it talks about, how they certify the deaths and code the deaths. So they categorize the deaths here. And yeah, you can see baseline average, and all these colored lines here are like the 2022 releases or 2023 releases, and these are the other years. So very high. This is all deaths, and it's, people can't just blame COVID for this. When you look at the numbers, it's crazy. Okay, so here at the bottom, you can download all these as an Excel spreadsheet or as a big zip file with all the spreadsheets in it. Feel free to do that if you like stats and you like crunching numbers, or if you like, Excel spreadsheets like the autist that you are. Anyways, let's look at the causes of death page. So the reference period here is 2021. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, there's a delay with the data, about 2 years. So that's why this reference data is 2021. The provisional mortality is 2023 because it's the initial data. It's not everything yet. Okay. Mortality rate remained low in 2021. Ischemic heart disease was leading cause of death, and suicide was the 15th leading cause of death. There were apparently in 2021 2 deaths from influenza, a record low. The reason why I find this very suspicious is because guess what other disease has the almost exact same symptoms as influenza? Yeah. In my opinion, again, not a doctor, not medical advice, the PCR tests and the rat tests are based in a lie. I will make a video or later on about why I think this way, because I personally have used PCR process in the lab. I don't say it's a test because it's not a diagnostic test. I've used it in a lab multiple times when I was studying. So I know what thresholds to run the cycles at, and I know the general, how the product actually works. And it was never a diagnostic tool. It was always used to just amplify samples before you do an analysis and test for other things after. It doesn't tell you if you're sick or if something caused your disease. And there's clips from the guy who invented the process talking about it and how people shouldn't be using it to diagnose things. because that was done in another pandemic in the past. More on that in the video. Okay, so here it's pretty crazy, right? 2021, rate for alcohol-induced deaths was the highest in 10 years. Yes, I wonder why people are drinking themselves to death when they've been isolated for months, locked in their own homes. Their businesses are destroyed because of the lockdowns, or they've lost their jobs because of the economy slowing down, and people being forced out of work. Not surprised. I tried to warn people this in my own private life before when it was happening, but nobody listened. They were too scared about COVID and thinking that everybody was going to die from COVID, that everything else didn't matter. You know, people who were struggling were thrown under the bus. Okay, so here, 2021. Australia recorded significantly lower than expected mortality during the first year of COVID-19, with death rates reaching historical lows. Does that sound like a pandemic to you? I don't think so. Okay, death decreased across many causes, but the decrease in respiratory disease deaths was most notable. Isn't that ironic? If it was a respiratory disease that was causing the pandemic, you'd have a significant increase in respiratory disease deaths. Yes? Okay. So, they talk about the variant, blah, blah, blah. Then they talk about all-cause mortality. Again, this is 2021. And they break down between male and female, and then by age. Okay. Top 5 leading causes of death. Ischemic heart diseases and dementia have a very close rate. 2017 was approximately 38% higher than deaths due to dementia. So they compare ischemic heart disease and dementia deaths. Okay, excluding 2020, again, because they had very low death rates. Number of ischemic heart diseases have been decreasing over time. Crude death rates due to dementia were the highest in the time series. All top 5 leading causes of death are non-communicable diseases. They are not passed person to person. So, if people want to say, oh, we reduced death because people were locked in their homes or whatever, right? Yeah, that wouldn't have mattered because these diseases are not transmissible diseases. The main leading causes of death are not transmissible diseases. So it doesn't matter if you isolate somebody, because they'll die from this disease if they're isolated or if they're around other people. They're not transmitted diseases. Okay. So here, the crazy, thing that I thought was nuts. Respiratory disease rate remains low. Second lowest mortality rate on record from respiratory diseases after 2020. Increase in 2021 compared to 2020 was due to chronic respiratory diseases such as COPD and interstitial lung disease. There were apparently 2 people who died from influenza, which is the lowest number of annual flu deaths on record. This compares to 55 in 2020 and 1,076 in 2019. So, I wonder what disease came in 2020 and 2021 that has the same symptoms as the flu. Because, how did we cure the flu mysteriously? Out of nowhere. The flu has been around for many years. It's many different strains of coronaviruses. Where did it go? It just disappeared. Yeah? into thin air. We cured the flu, apparently. Weird. Okay, so they talk about how pneumonia affects a lot of old people and is a common cause of death of older people who have long-term chronic conditions. Even though, yeah, so 2021 data remains 28.3% lower than the pre-pandemic rate for pneumonia. And usually those people who die from pneumonia have dementia or Alzheimer's. Pretty nuts, right? So you look here, COVID-19 was the 34th leading cause of death. Wasn't even in the top 5. Didn't even make the top 5. Yeah, and everybody just freaking out and saying it was super deadly, blah, blah, blah. 34th. The suicide, sorry, is the 15th leading cause of death. Yes, but let's just isolate and lock down everybody and pretend that's going to be great for their mental health. It totally not, cause major problems, especially when you kill people's livelihoods and their jobs. I wonder what that's going to do to their mental health. Okay. Funnily enough, here they say the TGA data and the Australian Bureau of Statistics data a little bit different. So the data collected and received might differ from TGA, so you have to keep that in mind when you're reading this. They work together to try to make sure the data remains consistent, blah, blah, blah. In Australia, apparently, there were only 15 deaths that were provided to the ABS where the COVID-19 vaccination was underlying cause of death. 10 of these deaths involve vaccine-induced, so vaccine-caused thrombocytopenic conditions. Majority of deaths, 92.3%, assigned as being due to the COVID-19 vaccine, have open coronial cases. So they're still processing that data. So they're still within the scope of the revisions. Like I said, that delayed data earlier. So TGA, as of October 2022, they said they identified 14 reports where cause of death was linked to vaccination. I think it's quite difficult to get real numbers on this because if you read a lot of vaccine injury stories, which we will after this, a lot of the patients are gaslit. They're diagnosed with something else. A lot of them are told they have anxiety. That's why they're getting chest pains and heart problems and an inflamed heart. Yeah, anxiety. So the fact that these victims are being gaslit, aren't even being coded and categorized in the right, disease category, of course, the data is going to be quite scarce. And TGA makes it very difficult. You have to jump through quite a lot of loops to prove that it was the vaccine that caused your injury. Yeah, so I wanted to, inform people that there is a COVID vaccine class action for injuries. So this website here, again, I'll link this later in the description. It talks about how this is a donation page to help with the legal fees of this class action, which you can join. You can click join the class action here. And you can click here for the documents that have been filed, and they give recent updates as well, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, you can find all that information on this page. Yeah. So there's even a, YouTube video about the case and how much, they've been funded. So I think if this is a matter that concerns you and you care about and you want to see the people who got injured very badly get some justice and some compensation for their injury, I think, yeah, it might be a good thing to check out. Okay, so I'm gonna get the vaccine injury story. So this is, ooh, I might have disconnected. Okay, we're back. This is Peter. His story was posted on the Instagram page Jab Injuries Australia. They're really good. I've been following them since pretty much the start of the vaccine rollout when they were posting people's injuries. I really like what they do. They give the voice to the people who are, being ignored and being gaslit. So this is Peter from Orange, New South Wales. Okay, so here, Peter's 54. He took 2 Pfizer vaccines. The reason why they use emojis is because Instagram censors you if you mention certain words, even in the pictures. Yeah, so OHM is their, I think one of the organizations that they work together with to help injured people, and React19.org is as well. So you can check their page out if you're interested. Okay. Why isn't this working? Okay. So Peter's story. I took screenshots because I don't trust Instagram sometimes. They're a bit wonky and they sometimes censor people. Okay. So Peter said, I was fit, healthy, and active before I had the COVID vaccine. I had no prior medical conditions, took no medications, didn't smoke, only drank socially. I worked 8 to 10-hour days as a delivery manager for a large company. He could easily work 10 hours, then go for a 40-minute walk with his wife when he got home. He enjoyed camping, working on old cars, transforming his 5.5 acre property into a sustainable parkland, and they even breed champion dogs and keep sheep and alpacas. He said, from the outset, I thought the vaccine rollout was ridiculous. I didn't believe a word the government said because I look at what the governments have done throughout history. People don't tend to trust the government when they remember history. He said he didn't want any of these vaccines because they were poorly researched, and he knew usually it took many years for a vaccine to be approved, and it was very rushed here, the fact they got approval so quickly. He didn't like the way people were coerced to take them, and he didn't like the way that people who refused to take them were treated as social pariahs. A lot of his family pressured him to do the right thing. But his wife had his back, was very against him taking the vaccine. She was prepared to even sell their property if it came down to it. So a good wife. She's got his back. She knows what's up. His employer was great. Never introduced mandates, so all the staff made their own decisions. He said he relented in the end because he had to be vaccinated to attend his autistic 11-year-old son's therapy sessions. So they were gonna have therapy sessions without his dad being there just because his dad wasn't vaccinated. It's a very difficult situation to put a child in and a family in. You don't want them missing out on speech therapy. Peter says he doesn't want them missing out on speech therapy, swimming lessons, occupational therapy, and other appointments. His wife also has an autoimmune disorder, and so he thought that getting vaccinated would help protect her. He got the vaccine on the 11th of September 2021. He said didn't feel any adverse effects. And then he got a second one in October 2021. Again, nothing happened within the 15-minute observation time. And then he kind of shrugged it off. A few days later, he came down with a cold and flu and a really bad headache. Doesn't normally get headaches, and he rarely gets the cold or flu. And he also noticed an ache in his arm that came and went mysteriously. Brushed it off. went to work. He said life returned to normal, but then he's in mid-December, where he struggled to walk without feeling tired and breathless. He grew lethargic and sleepless. By Boxing Day, he had a really high fever, headache, coughing, body aches, and breathlessness. Tested negative, for the COVID, and no one else in the family was sick. He never felt this bad before, and he was beginning to think it was from the vaccine. So during that period, Christmas, New Year's, he couldn't see his GP because they weren't available. He went to his GP in January, and they thought maybe he had a viral infection, maybe pneumonia. They prescribed him steroids. Didn't help him at all. Again, 17th of January, he got terrible night sweats the day before, I think, and soaked his sheets and bedclothes. He had shortness of breath that also worsened when he exerted himself. He got more blood tests ordered, CT scan and an echocardiogram. Blood tests were normal. CT scan ruled out pneumonia and bronchitis, but the echocardiogram indicated a low normal heart contractility. His wife was with him and told the doctor she requested a D-dimer test to check for blood clotting. It came back normal. She also expressed concerns about the vaccine and their alarming safety profile. Even though the doctor was okay with her bringing this up, he didn't ask any follow-up questions and prescribed him with antibiotics. Took the course, felt slightly better. Spent most of January at home, too sick to work. Then in February, his legs spasmed and he had restless legs at night. Neither of these issues existed pre-vaccine. So again, they went to the GP at the end of February, and his GP confessed that he had no idea what was wrong with him. He referred him to a cardiologist, and that the last echocardiogram was perfectly normal. He referred him to a lung specialist, and even though his wife had more questions, his doctor's attitude was pretty much see you later. So the lung specialist went to the lung specialist in March, told him what happened with the vaccine, and the specialist was on board with the possibility that he got a vaccine injury. In a letter to the GP, he noted that his symptoms began after the second Pfizer jab. He examined his chest, lung capacity, lungs were fine, sleep test revealed severe sleep apnea, got put on a sleep apnea machine, but by that time he was constantly breathless and breaking into sweats for no reason. He knew something was wrong, despite what the lung specialist had said. He would be standing, and then he'd suddenly have hot flashes and get so dizzy he needed to sit down. And to this day, these symptoms persist. So in August 2022, they went to see the cardiologist, and when they mentioned the possibility of a vaccine injury, the cardiologist quickly changed the subject. He saw them again in September. She said his lung scan was normal. He showed her the notes his wife encouraged him to take during his symptoms during an attack. And when she read them, she admitted that yes, he did have some kind of problem. So she ordered a myocardial perfusion study with a heart bug monitor to record my attacks. She said, if I don't find anything, I might have to put your symptoms down to an adverse reaction. So they came back, and the study apparently pointed to myocardial ischemia. So a condition that affects his left ventricle and his heart and causes the blood to flow normally but pump out abnormally. She thought it was a minor issue. The heart bug showed supraventricular tachycardia. So it causes intermittent dizziness and a fast heart rate. So he got prescribed beta blockers, heart medication, to take. Then he had a CT pulmonary angiogram in October, And the surgeon was dumbfounded because he was expecting to put a stent into his heart, but found nothing wrong. In a letter to his cardiologist, he said he needed a follow-up appointment to review his medications and optimize his treatment. Then when the cardiologist asked him when all his problems started, he told her it was after the second Pfizer vaccine. And she said she was seeing a lot of combined heart problems and sleep apnea in people who were vaccinated. So Peter says, another thing that concerned me since the vaccine was an increase in bowel bleeding. He had bled before the vaccine in 2021, but it was very infrequent. And he had a colonoscopy to give the all clear. But this time, his bleeding was more frequent and heavier. His GP referred him to a surgeon, did a colonoscopy, but they were concerned about putting him under because of his irregular heartbeat. Colonoscopy results were all normal. So, did more tests, angiograms, echocardiograms. Went to see the, cardiologist in February 2023. And she asked how he was. He told her that nothing had changed, and the atmosphere grew very uncomfortable. He had the feeling she had no idea what to say to him. She said that from her point of view, Peter's heart was fine. Peter sat there in disbelief. And his wife told him later that she saw a fire in his eyes. His wife turned to the cardiologist and said, "Why did the myocardial perfusion study mention myocardial ischemia?" The cardiologist says sometimes it's a false negative, that the test result could be wrong. And she would call a respiratory physiotherapist to help him regain his fitness. Once again, Peter could not believe his ears. He could barely walk and knew he needed much more support before he could even begin to work on fitness. But he felt like there was no point arguing her due to his previous appointments. She just wasn't open to discussion. He said to his wife, "I wasn't like this before the vaccine. What are they covering up?" I felt as if my injury was being swept under the carpet, and we gave each other a tearful hug in the car park. He went to finish work early, and people made fun of him because they could hear him huffing and puffing his way coming up the stairs, even though before the vaccine, he could go up the stairs very easily. He got worse night sweats that grew more frequent and more intense. He couldn't do any more physical work around the property. And he couldn't even shovel stuff without feeling breathless and dizzy. He couldn't even mow the lawn. And when they had a flood, he couldn't even fix the fence. Even though a few years ago, he could chop 2 tons of wood and lug it all back. And now he can't even cut a branch. So he said the bowel bleeding worsened, and he bled through the last week of March. This one's a bit small. I might zoom in a little bit. He had colonoscopy. They found several polyps, and then a gastroscopy at the same time, and they discovered a tiny stomach tumor. It took months to get the results because the pathology lab was so busy. He says, "Our health system is a mess." The doctor said 2 of his polyps were fine, but the 3rd was a low-grade cancer. So all the polyps were removed. And, when Peter first voiced his concerns that he thought it was a vaccine injury, his family thought he was mad. They said, "I couldn't possibly be vaccine injured," and his workmates agreed. But then when his mom and dad saw him having an attack, his mom said she could see he wasn't making it all up. And he said, "I was never making this up." So now it takes him 3 times longer to do what he used to do at work. He's not exactly a small person, but he feels less worthy and less masculine. He says, "I've always been very fit, and this is doing my head in. I still get night sweats and wake up dripping wet. I still have the same unpredictable leg spasms, and restless legs. Still can't do physical work around his property. His left arm still hurts randomly. And anytime he walks faster than a stroll, he gets shortness of breath and the sweating starts. He takes blood pressure medication and a low-dose anxiety medication, and no one can explain why he's constantly tired. He says, "My message to people is this. These vaccine injuries are an emotional and financial strain. Stop listening to the government because the government organized the vaccine rollout in the first place. And stop listening to the people who aided the government and administered these vaccines to people. Everyone is different, and we all have our own unique circumstances and health problems. What is good for one is not necessarily good for everybody else. Trust your gut." Yeah, so I thought that was worth covering because I think people should talk about this more. Stop sweeping the problem under the rug and refusing to talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, that was a long segment. Sorry. I also was trying not to cry at certain bits because I could really empathize with how he was feeling, and just so rough to see someone going through such suffering. So don't get too black-pilled. I know it's very easy to feel like, oh man, what can we do? Like things are so difficult. We're going through such a difficult time now, and yeah, like how can Christians move forward? What can we actually do? You feel so small and insignificant, but you're not. You can make a difference within the people in your own lives, within your own community. That's how change starts. I really love this tweet from Andrew Torba, so I thought I would read it before we end the show. This has been quite a long show, I think. So Andrew Torba tweeted this, that he said, "Addressing the crisis we face requires a broader perspective, a recognition that the spiritual predicament we are in can't solely be resolved through political measures," aka the WWE fight, the fake politician WWE fight. Ooh, I think I disconnected again. Nope, and I think we're back. Okay, so he says, "Our way out of the storm lies in going directly through it. Rather than being paralyzed by our inability to dramatically change the situation through political means, we must channel our energy into areas where we wield actual influence and power. Our households, our businesses, our churches, our local communities. Amidst chaos, a beacon of hope emerges in the form of focusing on what's within our grasp. As faithful Christians, nurturing a sense of reverence and adoration for the divine can serve as an anchor amidst the uncertainty of modernity, guiding the next generation to hold both fear and love for the Lord paves the way for resilience in the face of adversity. Extending care and support to our families and local communities is another avenue of influence. In these microcosms, we have the ability to enact tangible change, fostering connections that weather the storm's intensity. Oh, I think I might have disconnected again. And we're back. Sorry. My internet keeps bugging out. So he basically encourages people to forge pathways and growth in community, do something that's within your reach. You can't aim to solve the world's problem and cure everybody's problems, but you can address the problems in your own life, your own personal problems, your community's problems, your family's problems. You can actively work on those things. You can build a stronger church community. And, our source of hope and solace is our unwavering faith in Christ. Amidst the chaos, his light shines as a beacon of hope, reminding us that even in the darkest times, there's a source of strength that transcends all challenges. As we navigate the trials of our era, his teachings offer guidance and solace, igniting a flame of optimism that guides us forward. So, the way forward, he says, is a comprehensive approach, a blend of spiritual grounding, community nurturing, and building resilient infrastructure that paves the way for a future that's not solely defined by chaos. By focusing on what we can control, we inch closer to the light on the other side of the storm, a future where hope and strength reign supreme. So I think that's a great, way to end the stream.